Hello there. Excuse me. Well, I know I did say I was going to do two this week, but well, I got home from work last night and I was exhausted. So here we are with just the one. As I said, I'm going to try and do these going forward on Sunday afternoons because Sundays I'm pretty much guaranteed being off. I try very hard not to work on Sundays, but if I end up missing 2 days, then well, I got to work Sunday. But that's neither here nor there right now. Little progress report this week. I spent most of my writing time this week working on the fast fading light. I got a little hung up on a scene, but I'm now forcing myself to get beyond it and get beyond my obsession with describing in absolute detail what Andromeda is wearing. So I have to force myself past that, but I'm feeling pretty good about it. Feeling actually better about a few things right now. Except except that I keep rewriting the same scenes over and over again. But that's just me being me. So this week we're going to talk about the third book that I self-published, Bright Symmetry. I like the way that cover turned out. The little colored lights there, those are supposed to represent our alien race. This is the third book that I self-published, and it was a bit of an experiment on my part. Rather than be told in individual chapters, it's told the story, which covers about a year of time. Is actually told in a series of short stories. I'm not going to call them short. None of them really. Well, a couple of them really are. But I was just trying to do something a little bit different there. It covers the life of Scott Madigan, who is immortal. He will show up in other things once I get back to them. So you'll be seeing more Scott and more of his partner, lover, Zoe. Sorry. It started off with well, first let me just say the stories are not arranged and were written out of sequence. For example, I wrote A God to Dance With first because I had this dream of going down a huge marble staircase into a dance hall, if you will, big open space. And there's people dancing, and in the back of my mind, and in the distance, I heard a man's voice say, "Great, a God to dance with," and that's where the title came. And the story grew from there. And then, excuse me. Then later on a sequel came into existence, which came to be known as the Ark of Heaven. The other stories were written pretty much out of sequence. I knew where each one fit in in the overall storyline, so that really wasn't too difficult. I just wrote them as they came to me until I had all 7. There were supposed to be 12. There's actually more to Scott and Zoe's adventures after the last reading of A Bright Symmetry, but that will come later on, hopefully. And I was also beginning to realize that going to 12 stories was getting big and unwieldy, and this kept it at a manageable size. So easier for me to deal with, and easier for someone to get into. Excuse me. So, starting at the top, the 7 stories begin with a little bit of a prologue titled Only Time. And it begins with Scott and Zoe arriving back at Earth to visit Scott's old friends, George Severin and Brianna Alexander. While there, it's revealed that George is also immortal. He's, I think, he's a year younger than Scott, immortality-wise. They were born in the same year. He became immortal a year after Scott did. And Brianna is a vampire. And by that time, there's nothing to being a vampire. A lot of people don't really believe they exist, but somebody sitting in a restaurant ordering a tall glass of blood doesn't really raise too many eyebrows. While they're there and they're talking with George and Brenna, Zoe hears a voice say "Goodbye, Zoe," but there's no one there. And Scott, at the same time, thinks he sees someone who looks like an old friend from the 21st century. But again, there's nobody there, which raises an eyebrow. In literary terms, this is called foreshadowing. And it ends with 2 unidentified people having a short conversation about one being able to finally say goodbye to somebody, and then the 2 of them just disappearing. Before I go any further, yes, there are going to be spoilers in here. Sorry. The second story is a God to Dance With itself. As I said, the title at least came from a dream, and there were 2 versions of this story. There was one that I wrote in a month. I wrote it in exactly 30 days, which is the fastest I've ever written anything. And I think I annoyed my neighbors at the time, because while I was writing it, all I would listen to was Mussorgsky's Pictures at an Exhibition over and over and over again. But it worked. It got the story finished. And when it was done, the basic plot line was good. I don't know. It felt like I was telegraphing the end a little too soon in the story. So I made some changes to Zoe's character. She had initially been someone dying of an incurable disease. Then I just changed it to someone going through a bout of depression. And they are with some friends of theirs as part of an expedition, not exhibition, sorry. Part of an expedition to investigate what's a being known as the Lost God, the sleeping god on the planet Stelvra. And it turns out that the myth is when the god awakens, he will merge with whoever finds him, and then that person will go on to lead the Stelvran nation. The Stelvran leading them, however, had other ideas. He thought he was just going to be granted the god's power, and would then proceed from there to take over the planet and essentially establish a dictatorship, which is what he was planning. But long story short, Zoe ends up being the one merging with it, and that's when the god is revealed to be a sentient energy being known as a Dolwa, Dolwa. and the god had, in in some violation to the people, to the tenets of her people, who just observe but never interact. She interacted. She helped the Stelvrans when they were still primitive and helped them survive. She showed them. She basically showed them the basics of agriculture, and let them proceed from there. She never did any of it herself. She showed them how to do it, and then let them to do it. She was very disappointed in them when she woke up and found that they had split into to at least two factions and were on the verge of civil war. Um, the story ends with um, everybody back on board the main ship and getting ready to leave Stelvra, and Scott a bit uncertain about how things are going to proceed um, with this new version of Zoe. And from there, I moved on. We move on to Being, which is the third story. It picks up the morning after um, A God to Dance With. Uh, they have to meet with the ship's captain, named Nomira Slanovich. Yeah, my Ova story have very Russian sounding names. Um, and Zoe is uncertain because she feels very uncertain, like something is about to go wrong. Her people do have a limited precognitive sense, but it really doesn't give much of a warning. It's basically just a nagging feeling that something's about to happen, but they're really not sure what. So she goes up. They go meet with the captain, the other two people from the expedition, and Zoe explains to them she's just an explorer. All her people are just explorers. They're observers. They just watch, with the exception of her. They almost all just watch. They don't interact. She did it. She did what she did to preserve life. And then things take a turn. She senses just before it happens that there's something goes wrong with the ship's main reactor and drive system. She saves the ship, and then is the one to actually repair the damage. This kind of nails down her explanation to everybody that she's just an explorer. She's there to preserve life. She's not there to harm anybody, to do anything untoward. She is a good person, and that's when they start. That's when Scott starts to come around and be more comfortable with her, more accepting of her as being now the new Zoe, if you will. The story does end, though, with an indication that something may not be right. Her hands are starting to shake, and they're not supposed to. The fourth story, excuse me, is called Intermezzo. It's takes place about 6 months later, and it's a short little piece, uh, because things have not been going good with Zoe. She's getting very weak. Her hands are getting very unsteady, or even more unsteady. She is basically feels like she's dying, which is, her people don't die. She is 600,000 years old, so, and has been traveling the galaxy for 500,000 years. So there's really um, not much that can affect her, but she is starting to feel like she's dying, and she needs to get back to her home sector. The problem is it's on the other side of the galaxy from where her and Scott currently are at the start of this. So, under the guise of mounting a scientific expedition with the science directorate, because Zoe can only travel, she can travel at the speed of light. She can't travel faster, and she's afraid that she won't get there in time uh, to find out what is wrong, what's going wrong with it, what's going on with her. So, like I said, is Scott Mount proposes and has approved an expedition, part scientific, partly diplomatic, to travel to the sector where the Dolwa live, and maybe do some investigation, exploration into them, and also maybe try and establish diplomatic relations. We're not 100% sure that's going to work. And it ends with them getting ready to meet with the science directorate representatives and get everything nailed down. The next story, The Ark of Heaven, was actually the first story written after A God to Dance With. It is the expedition to the Patrician sector to find out what's going on with Zoe. And we're introduced then to Arcadia Ryan, an old friend of Scott's, a really old friend of Scott's. Yes, she's immortal too. Who happens to be an independent starship captain, has her own ship. It's just her adopted daughter, and a crew of synthetic beings known as independent cybernetic sentients. You can't call them androids because none of them are in human form. All of them are more mechanical in form. They're more streamlined. They almost look like pieces of art, but they're intelligent robots. Picture R2-D2 with no legs and just floating on a repulsor field, if you will, something along those lines. When they get to the sector, they find out the Doa are very curious because they like they like the ship's drive field. They keep bouncing off it. There's quickly a moment of betrayal when part of the science team turns out to have nefarious goals. Yes, they are trying to learn about the Dolwa, but they're treating them as potential threats, not as potential allies. And a little more foreshadowing in here. There's a moment when two of the science directorate representatives are talking. The lead and his chief assistant, chief researcher, chief assistant, if you will. I'm not. He says something along the lines of, if necessary, we'll have to come back with a second expedition. And she kind of looks at him and then says, no, we don't need a second expedition. And he repeats, but then again, we probably don't need a second expedition. This is what I call a WTF, a what the frau moment. Yeah, it's a what the fuck moment. So the moment when a character does or says something that makes you just go, the fuck? And the story ends, this particular story ends with a confrontation between Zoe and the head of the science expedition. Zoe figures out that the reason she was feeling so bad, why she had a quote-unquote sleep on Stelvra, and why she's feeling so weak now is her people can assume any form, but they have to go back to their natural form on a regular basis in order to rest. They don't actually sleep, but they return to their energy form to rest, if you will. So as long as she does that on a regular basis, she'll be fine. It ends up with her being exiled, which is fine. It allows her to continue traveling with Scott, and it ends with the two of them, with Scott finally saying, "Okay, you are Zoe. You are Zoe. You're not the energy being that took Zoe's place. You're Zoe." Story 6 is called Circle. It's when we travel back to Earth and we go back and meet back up with George and Brenna. And Brenna, being a vampire, has really a bad reaction to Zoe initially. And we also, in this, find an answer to what happened in Only Time. Scott and Zoe travel back. It turns out that Scott rendered invisible under using a spell, using something similar to a spell called Presence Mask, rendering him invisible. He's the one who actually walks into the restaurant, and standing behind Zoe says, "Goodbye, Zoe." And he finally actually says goodbye to the original Zoe. And in the meantime, Kath has also assumed the form of an old friend of Scott's from the 21st century, and that's who Scott sees. And so that circle comes to a close. And then there's one last story called "And Forever," and it's the epilogue to it's the period at the end of the sentence. The last circle closes. Zoe is hanging out by the sun. She's having a snack, if you will. She's feeding on solar radiation and using the extra input to boost her mental abilities, so she can sense everything in the solar system. She can sense all the minds of all the people. She can sense the drive fields of the various ships, them jumping to hyperspace or jumping down from hyperspace. She can sense it all. And then there's one familiar voice, one voice that she wasn't expecting, and that's a character from the Ark of Heaven named Lane Danforth. And when she comes back, Zoe's wondering why her mind feels so old. Why does she feel so much older? She was identified as an elder in the Ark of Heaven, but she's older than that. And it turns out, as it's revealed in this, that Zoe is actually Arisha Mastani. And if you've read the story The End of Seconds, you know who Arisha Mastani is. Just a quick thumbnail for those who haven't read it. Arisha Mastani was an observer, time traveler in her own universe, the universe previous to the fictional universe, to this fictional universe. She traveled back in time. Something went horribly wrong. The universe was destroyed. She was the last survivor. She released a packet of energy, setting off the new Big Bang. Essentially, she was God, if you will. She initiated the Big Bang. She didn't. The only race she created was the Dolwa, and they're there. Every galaxy in the universe has Dolwa in it to observe the galaxy, and everything that they observe is passed on to her, and then she acts from there. If nothing is potentially going to go wrong, then she leaves everybody alone. If there's something that could catastrophically happen, like, oh, somebody wants to travel back in time and witness the Big Bang, yeah, she's going to stop you from doing that. And it's not going to be anything overt. She'll just find a way to prevent you from traveling that far back. Establish some kind of field or something. No one's tried yet. So, that's the third book, A Bright Symmetry. Excuse me again. Like I said, it was an experiment. I like the stories. I like the way they all turned out. It does kind of flow pretty well. But that's it. I hope you've enjoyed this. remember, until July 31st, all the books, all 8 of them are on sale through Smashwords, ebooks only. Sorry about that. I'll have the link down below to my Smashwords authors page so you can get to that. All the books are also available on Amazon, Lulu, a whole bunch of other places, and I'll have the rest of the links also down below. If you do buy any of the books, please go back to Amazon, Smashwords, Goodreads, and leave a review. Good, bad, or indifferent. It all helps. And I guess that's going to be it for this week. And remember, we are each of us the heroes of our own stories and the villains of someone else's. Bye.